So, yeah, welcome and thanks for being here. I'm Callie. I work with Extinction Rebellion Durham since the summer of 2019, and more recently, I'm one of the co-founders of Quit Carbon NC. We're not going to spend a lot of time this afternoon looking at the science of how bad things are. I'll put a link for an article in the New York Times in the chat. This article appeared on Monday, and if you want a rundown of the current state of things, if you haven't seen it, it gives it to us. It's a summary of the report from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which is the United Nations group of scientists who have been studying this in depth. For now, we're going to let it be enough just to read from the opening paragraph, the way that the Times introduces that report. And this is what they said. The dangers of climate change are mounting so rapidly that they could soon overwhelm the ability of both nature and humanity to adapt. Right? Overwhelm the ability of both nature and humanity to adapt. Means extinction, right? That's how I read that. Unless greenhouse gas emissions are quickly reduced. And not just extinction, but death and suffering over an extended period of time for life on Earth. We're a hair's breadth away from the end of history. The time for words is over. There's only now. And what we do with that. We're here to find the people who've heard enough words and who are ready to act. The strategy for social change that we're using in Quit Carbon NC is one of nonviolent civil resistance. We are designing our actions following the evidence from social science to give us the best chance, and probably the only chance, to turn things around fast enough to make a difference. The truth is that the climate crisis is climate catastrophe for much of the world now. The truth is that the greenhouse gases that we have already put into the atmosphere will bring more warming and more harmful results from that warming in the decades and centuries to come, even if we stopped all emissions tomorrow. These are facts. They're not about politics, they're about physics. We have a hard time staying clear on these basic facts, in large part because politicians and the media, under the influence of the wealthy and powerful, lie to us about these facts all of the time. In the 1970s and 80s, ExxonMobil conducted a campaign to lie outright to the world about the fact that burning fossil fuels produces greenhouse gases that get trapped in the atmosphere and make the earth hotter. They lied in order to make money. It's like we're living in the middle of an undeclared war on humanity. That's how it seems to me. Most of the lies we're told come in the form of half-truths and distortions that leave us feeling befuddled and powerless. The evidence that we are in crisis because of the climate is there in the headlines every day. Nearly a year ago, one of the world's top scientists, Sir David King, who used to be the chief scientific advisor to the British government, said, "We have to move rapidly. What we do, I believe, in the next 3 to 4 years will determine the future of humanity." He's talking about the climate crisis and whether or not humanity has a future of any kind of quality or at all. This is clear, right? So why don't we know it? Why don't we act like we know it? So one part of the answer to that question, and it has got some complicatedness to it, but one part that we need to understand is the way that we are bombarded with lies by distortion from the media all of the time. Even media that has been mostly informative about the climate crisis uses language that makes the picture fuzzy. For example, it's common for news articles to use the word threatens. It's a big word in talking about climate things. And they use it when they're describing the relationship between increased emissions and things that are widely accepted as fact among scientists as being the predictable results of those increased emissions. So you'll read something like the carbon emissions currently in the atmosphere threaten to bring famine to millions of people in the next decade. Sentences like that, or threaten increased forest fires, or threaten the jet stream. They don't just threaten these things. Science is certain that they are going to and are now causing these problems. So just using that one word, threatened, it makes a distortion. It fuzzies up the picture. ExxonMobil has and other petroleum companies, they started out with the flat out lying about warming, and then when they could no longer get away with that, they moved into a public relations campaign that just is mind-boggling, and to the point now where they have one of their executives bragged sometime in the last year or so that they have sway of influence over the New York Times editorial board, that they have been able very purposefully to leave us with these feelings of, oh, it's really bad, but what can anyone do? It's not an accident that we feel that way. Politicians lie sometimes outright, sometimes in how they spin the truth. So recently, John Kerry, who's the U.S. Special Envoy on Climate, and who I really believe wants to, understands the problem, wants to do good things, he issued a dire warning. It was very straightforward in the beginning of his press statement, telling us that the 26th International UN-sponsored Conference on Climate, COP26, which met in November, was telling us that they had totally failed to meet the crisis. And his statement to the press began with a clear, accurate warning about the urgent and extreme harm facing us because of climate change. He even acknowledged that the world's leaders had not done anything remotely close to addressing the dangers. And then he pivoted at the close of his statement, or at what the Times gave as the close of his statement, to reassure us that nevertheless, some important steps had been taken by the nations at COP26. So maybe he didn't flat out lie, but the way that he tweaked the truth, or the Times, I'm not sure why that quote came out the way it did, but it distorted reality. It left the impression that, well, it does sound like things are quite bad, but there's no need to get too worried about it because John Kerry and all the governments are working on it. And that's a lie. And John Kerry knows it's a lie. I don't mean to be harsh when I say that. I'm sure he had his reasons, but I'm also sure that John Kerry knows that it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter at all if a couple of things happened at COP26 that might improve the chances of nations eventually taking steps to reduce carbon emissions. It doesn't matter because we don't have decades to get this done. We have 2 to 3 years. And climate change isn't a slow and steady process. It's one of those, the worse it gets kind of things, like drinking if you're an alcoholic. We use the example of a ball rolling down a hill. We've all had this experience at some point in life, I'm sure. If you're chasing a ball that's rolling down a hill, you know that you need to grab that ball before it starts rolling so fast that if you don't catch up with it, before that happens, you never will. Right? It doesn't matter that COP26 agreed to some things that would be helpful or would have been helpful if the ball were still at the top of the hill. It's not. We've got 3 to 4 years. And John Kerry knows that. Of course he does. One of the authors of the original study out of Harvard that exposed Exxon's campaign in the 70s and 80s, and then went back and studied again that public relations, massive campaigning, some of distortion from petroleum industry. He summed the situation up in this way. I'm going to read you his quote. I'm very cognizant of the fact that I am part of the climate change generation, born into a society locked into fossil fuels, not for want of scientific understanding or technology or policy know-how, but because of the greed and disinformation and lobbying of a small group of fossil fuel interests and conservative billionaires. So we're being lied to by government, by media, and by the corporate elites. And then there are also, we have to look at this, the lies that we tell ourselves. There's a way, of course, it's a human thing. We believe what we want to believe, right? And particularly the lives of us who live with some degree of privilege are bound with lies. The idea that we're not hurting anyone by our high carbon way of lives is a lie. According to a 2020 report from Oxfam, in 2015, the world's richest 10% were responsible for 50%, that's 1/2, of all global emissions. All right, which kind of fits a comfortable belief. Oh, it's those rich people that are doing it to all of poor us. Except that that same report also tells us that an income of $38,000 is enough to put someone in the world's richest 10%. Mm. Yeah, it's us, y'all. Yeah. The average entry-level teacher salary in North Carolina is over $43,000, and North Carolina does not pay its teachers well, famously. The idea that we can continue living with, so that's that lie, that we're not hurting anybody because the rest of the world is suffering because of, our carbon way of lives. It seemed to us to be, just kind of the minimum of what a person should have, right? To think about that. We need to do something about that. And whether we choose to do something about that or not, there's another lie we often live by who are somewhat comfortable still, which is the lie that this is going to go on indefinitely. The idea that we can continue to live with the comforts of privilege is a lie. The cupboard is bare. The changes are coming. Our only choices now lie in how bad the changes are and in how we choose to have them come. The longer we wait for something we don't even identify really what it is, things to get better, the longer we wait, the more emissions and the more effects of the emissions are certain, not threatening, but certain to happen. The sooner we accept that our old lives are over, the faster we act to help create a kinder and gentler transition to the new world. The big danger here is the danger of social collapse. As the effects of warming worsen, what happens is that people are no longer able to grow food because weather changing. We see that, the weather changing. And when that happens, that's when we see the fall of everything that holds our society together. You know, the Amazon trucks will not be coming anymore, nor will our Social Security checks. There won't be any Medicare, and all these things that we take for granted depend on society holding together. And, you know, as we're seeing with the Russia's invasion of the Ukraine, when there are pressures, and those pressures get bad enough, all the old norms go out the window, and it can happen fast. It's also true that this idea that happiness comes from boundless consumption, which is so easy to be lulled by, really hypnotized by in our society, in our culture, that idea is a lie. It's not consumption that makes people happy. I'm bold to say that. I know there's research that backs it up, but just a moment's reflection on what makes each of us really happy, I think, clarifies that question. It's not a bunch of stuff. And the sooner we stop acting like the earth is our infinite play toy, then we have a chance to learn more about what really makes us happy. We're imprisoned by the lies we live by, and we need to get our heads around this now. Climate change isn't like other problems. At some point, we won't be able to change our minds and change our ways enough to make it better. And that quote that I read at the opening from the New York Times, beyond the ability of humanity or nature to adapt, tells us that that point of no return is soon. We need to change quickly, was their language in that quote. And it's important also to always be aware that this problem of climate catastrophe isn't just the problem of climate catastrophe. The same powerful political and economic interests that caused and perpetuate the climate crisis are destroying the Earth's living systems in other ways, many other ways as well. Everything from pesticides to plastic exists because someone is making a lot of money from it. And the violence and greed that assaults the planet also robs and kills the people who live here, especially the most vulnerable among us. The climate crisis is already climate catastrophe for many parts of the global South and for the poor in the North. Black people and people of color, Indigenous people, women, children, and old people, and really anyone who gets in the way of somebody who has some power in their drive to make money gets hit first and gets hit hardest. Think for a minute together, maybe take a few breaths here, thinking back to what brings us here today. And especially I'm inviting us all to, as we're taking those breaths, remember the things that we love and how that love is really what's underneath why we're here. can be so easy to get overwhelmed by the power of what stands against us. And partly, I think that's got to do with PR. I think we're convinced of that. But if you think about the love that you feel for the people and places, for the life on this earth, how powerful is that love? Just connecting with it and feeling it like moving through the body. And that's life, that love. And that energy is strong. That's the love of, the famous story of the mother who picks up the car to get it that's fallen on her child, just that surge of nothing is going to stop us because our love is that strong. So let's don't let anybody make us ever forget that. And when we put that together in a group, that's when we can really see some change. So that's what we're looking to bring today. Another thing that's made it hard for people to act is that there hasn't been a clear pathway to effective action. And that's what we're here to provide today. Other approaches to environmental activism over the past 30 years, they've failed to slow this runaway train of climate catastrophe. Every year of marching and educating and campaigning for the best candidate, signing petitions and making donations, every year when we've done that kind of work has been a year when carbon emissions went up 60% since 1990. We have 3 to 4 years to make radical changes. Experience tells us that more of the same has a 0% chance of doing that. 0. We're ready to try something different. So we're looking for that way to act together that has the best chance of bringing fast, uncompromising stop to this death march that we're on as a species. Quit Carbon NC is one of many independent groups that are springing up internationally to follow a strategy that was developed by Extinction Rebellion co-founder Roger Hallam. Roger's best estimate at the moment is that by following this approach, this strategy, we give ourselves a 25 to 50% chance of forcing governments to make significant moves to stop the climate crisis. These aren't great odds, admittedly, but they're way better than 0, way better. So just to talk a bit about this strategy, because it's very practical. This is not, again, about politics. It's very pragmatic, what works. That's what we're looking at. And the people in these different groups around the world are Roger's really encouraging people to do this, and other people are too, keeping track of things like what's effective. So if you hand out flyers, which flyer you count, how many people come to a meeting after you hand out how many flyers. And that's, we're conducting this massive experiment to see what's going to be the most effective. So the strategy, it's got 5 key elements, things that really have to be included in order for it to be effective. The first of these is strict nonviolence. This is an absolute essential for effectiveness. It's also important that the demand that a particular series of actions be a demand that makes sense to people, and that has some chance of being won, or at least won to some degree, if not completely, at least to some extent. That kind of being able to be won is really good for energy and motivation and momentum, keeping things going. It's important that the actions be ongoing. So for some days, hopefully weeks or even months, but certainly more than an afternoon or even more than a whole day. These are not demonstrations in the way that we're familiar with. We're not looking to get as many people as possible to show up at the same place for a picnic, basically with speeches. It's different. So there's this ongoing is important because it communicates a strength in the message, but also for the next element, which is that the actions need to be disruptive. So if you've been on any demonstrations lately in Washington, D.C., the police in Washington are so, they're so well versed in how to handle these kind of things that it's just, a day at the office for them, really, that it's not, nobody minds too much because they know we're all going home soon, and you just kind of get it over with as least trouble as possible and, manage things. But if we keep coming back day after day, then that gets harder to manage. That becomes more disruptive, which is essential because we want to communicate clearly and strongly the reality of where we are. This is not a picnic on the, in front of the Washington Monument kind of a problem. I don't mean to at all devalue other actions. I just mean to say things are different now. And the actions also need to involve sacrifice. And again, that sacrifice, along with being ongoing, being disruptive, the people who are there being willing to be arrested, being willing to be yelled at by passersby, being willing to have their bodies picked up and thrown off the road without resisting in any way, without becoming violent. This all works together to demonstrate the strength of what motivates people for being there. So this all matters a lot because of what we talked about earlier, because it's like we're all in a trance, and this form of action is really trying to break that trance. Words can't do it. Persuasion can't do it. We have to demonstrate with our bodies how bad it is. And with the way that we act, that we're not here to fight with any one person. We're here to fight a system that's coming after us all. So every one of those elements is essential to be successful. And also the strategy includes a couple of technical elements, like it needs to be led by a small group so that the people who are leading can make changes quickly. This is a very go, go, go kind of way of acting. And as things come up, the leadership needs to be able to adapt quickly. There need to be 10 people, roughly 10 people for every one person who's risking arrest, 10 people who do not risk arrest, but who do all the other work that's necessary in order to support the arrest being meaningful. So for example, if 10 of us get arrested out on highway, on highway 40 between, Durham and Raleigh somewhere, just for a random example, and we're arrested and we're taken to jail. And even if we're arrested and taken to jail for 3 days in a row, if that's the last anybody hears about it, that was a waste of a lot of time and effort. What needs to happen is that people need to work with the media to line up interviews so that the minute those people who are arrested get out of jail, they're being interviewed by local news shows, on podcasts. They're invited to speak to classrooms at colleges and universities, so that the action is used to bring in more people, and the action is used to communicate as widely and strongly as possible how bad things are and how much this change needs to happen. So we're going to follow that plan at the end of March or early April, and we'll be timing it to coordinate with similar actions in the UK and other countries. We're putting together right now a structure to have those at least 10 to 20 people who are trained in nonviolent civil resistance, who sit down in the road or block streets or other areas. We'll hold banners to proclaim our demand. We'll come back for at least 3 days if we have enough people. We'll publicize well and give people a clear pathway to join us. So that's our plan, to follow that strategy. We're changing our model of activism. We no longer see our actions as events, but understand ourselves to be living in resistance all the time. This isn't a hobby. It's not another club to join. It's a way of life. People in Nazi-occupied Europe were in resistance every day, every night. And there are people around the world, as I mentioned, who are following this model. We've been going to Zoom meetings with people from the UK, from the US, other people in the US, Australia, Germany, France, Italy, brave people with lots of heart who are blocking motorways and going on hunger strikes, demanding government response to the climate emergency. It's really uplifting. It's really encouraging to see these people. This idea of using small ongoing actions as a way to build towards larger actions, it's not a new idea. We're informed and inspired in this approach by examples from the civil rights movement of the late 50s and 60s. Tremendous amount to be learned in looking at things like the Montgomery bus boycott, the Freedom Riders, the Children's March in Birmingham, the lunch counter sit-ins, which began in Durham, North Carolina. Yeah, there's a lot to be learned and a lot of just beauty in seeing what we did. And also, of course, Gandhi in India. Social science tells us this is where we get the 25 to 50% chance from studies of these kind of movements. So now we all have the information. There is something that can be done to make a difference. And that's what we're about here. One way that you can go ahead and get plugged in now is to go to quitcarbonnc.org and click the sign up button, which will take you to a form. And that form will let you both, if you'd like, to go ahead and make a pledge to be arrested in the upcoming action, to be inarrestable with nonviolent civil disobedience or civil resistance training. You can do that there. And you can also sign up to help with some of the work that we need to have done. There are other jobs too, which I'm going to talk about in a minute, that we could talk about for this week. Once you filled up this in the sign-up sheet, somebody will contact you about how to get to work. Also, now we've started forming affinity groups, and affinity groups are the groups of people who are intending to be arrested at least once in the upcoming action. And they're just the kind of thing, it sounds like, groups for people to form bonds with each other, to have affinity, to get to know each other, support each other in the action. And this is scary for everybody. I don't know anybody that is like, oh, goody, I get to go do this. Except, if it weren't for the fact that there's really nothing else to do, we'd probably do something else. But we need our groups, we need our support groups, and that's what the affinity groups are for. And then there are also working groups, and the working groups are about doing all the other work, like making the banners for people to hold when they're in the road and contacting the media to arrange the interviews when people get out of jail, things like that. Very practical work that needs to be done. And your help is very much needed right now. For us to make this happen, it's going to take a lot more work than the people who are involved right now can do without help in the next few weeks. So one thing everybody can do is hand out flyers, and we can show you how to do that. So it's also, for me, has been meaningful to know that the world, we've heard this on the meetings we've been to internationally, the world is waiting for us to act in the US. They know that if we don't, then they are done for, right? So people over in France and Italy out there sitting on the road, a lot of them are young people, and they're doing this, even though they haven't really gotten a strong sign from us yet that we're going to do it too. It's pretty touching to see that. When we free ourselves from the lies that we live by, then we're ready to act. We're asked to hear facts that are overwhelmingly horrifying, and to hear them clearly enough that we see them fully in our minds and know them to the depths of our hearts. And once heard, seen, and known, we're asked to act on them, no matter the sacrifice. All of that will be hard, but we won't be alone. We will be in very good company. The company of those who came before, like the children of Birmingham's Children's March, and also of each other. We won't be leaving the people of the global South and the poor of the North alone to deal with catastrophe upon catastrophe without privilege to cushion the blows. We can keep those Black Lives Matter signs in our front yards, knowing we are walking our talk. We will not send our children into the future alone. After we die, hopefully someday, a long time from now, they will take the memory of us with them, fighting for them, loving them, showing them how to live in times such as these. We can give our children these memories. We have that power. If nothing else, we have that power. And all of the children are our children. By listening to this talk, you've taken the first step. The next step is to get on the website and sign up, or to continue talking with us now about things that you can do this week. Really appreciate you all hanging in there for this talk, for the whole talk. I want to check and see where everybody is. Maybe a few more deep breaths. I know some of the people who are here, I know Anne and Kent are working with the affinity group and have made the pledge to step into action as arrestables soon. I wondered if either of you would be willing to talk a little about how you came to that decision. It's fine if you're not. I sprung it on you. It's fine to save that for another time.
I am interested in participating in pathways that are designed to change things quickly. So I don't choose this path because of anything about it that's particularly appealing. I choose it because it's a path, you know, and people have thought hard about what could possibly be workable given that we're stalling. So I consider it a privilege to be presented with a path.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's, I mean, I've been interested in environmental issues for a long, long time. It has become more and more clear, I guess for me, I've said this before, but starting in 2018, when so many things happened in a row that were just on another magnitude of destruction, that I got, wow, this is not just a serious problem that we've got to do something about soon, but this is something we've got to do about it now or never. It's really different. You know, when you look at struggles in the past for whether it's civil rights or, you know, suffragettes for women's right to vote or so many things, people involved in that wanted it to happen now, but if it didn't happen now, you know, it could happen next year. With this situation, there really is a time limitation on it. If we don't change things soon, we really are looking at the loss of the world as we know it, including our civilization. So for me, it comes down to what do we want to do in that situation? You know, possibly the end of, like I say, the planet as we know it, the end of human organization as we know it. And to me, I want to take a shot at getting things to change. And it looks to me like, nonviolent civil disobedience is the only thing that has been able to do that with a good outcome. Violent revolutions have had dramatic changes, but they usually end up being at least as bad, if not worse, than the situation they were, revolting against. So that's what drew me to it. Sounds all so down, but it's really fun to be with a bunch of people doing things you care about and with other people that care about things. It's got its good aspects.
Yes, thank you, Kat. Indeed. I'll tell you what, I think we'll close for now. I'll go ahead and turn up the recording and see if there are any more specific questions around what actions we need work on, this week, in case anybody wants to talk about that. But so let's just say goodbye and thank you very much.
Thank you.
Being here and staying. We can do this. We can do this together. Yeah. Well, either we can or it won't get done. Let's put it that way.
There's not a Congo line.
Yeah, unfortunately, true.
Not yet, but this model actually is about creating that Congo line. Because I'm going to say this because you've made that comment. The other piece about what happens when there's repression, and you really saw this in the civil rights movement. I mean, we in the South, if you grew up in the South in the 60s, the power makes me cry to think of it. When I was a child and changed my life seeing this, the power of Black people standing up and saying, no more, It released an energy that you could never have seen coming until it happened. And it changed everything. At the same time, there's still so much more to change. But I have no doubt about the effectiveness of this strategy because I've seen it. There's something about repression. It's like, the pressure of the air in the balloon, and when you pop it, it just all comes running out. That's what we're looking for, and that's why we designed the strategy the way we have, to maximize the chances of that happening. So thanks for giving me the chance to say a little bit more, and let's keep reminding each other of that as time goes on, because keeping our energy strong is a big task in the face of everything pushing. But we have reason, just looking at the faces here, the concern that brings us here for more than an hour on a Sunday afternoon when there are all sorts of things we could all be doing instead. That means something. Thank you.
That's great.
That's very good.
Yeah, thanks.